Instagram.
We're live now.
We're live? Yeah. Hello, welcome back. I'm so sorry, everybody. We got cut there. Not sure how that happened. Instagram tends to do these things. Oh, hi.
Hello.
You're back.
You're
Oh,
back.
God. This just got cut. I'm not sure how this happens.
No
Instagram.
worries, no worries. Where were we?
We're talking about the dichotomy between like us and nature and how we always think of
Right.
nature separate from us.
Yeah. So, especially when you grow up in cities, when you grow up in an industrialized place, which most places that we do are, we tend to think of nature and culture as separate and,
Right.
humans and nature as two separate things. And that kind of creating that space, even if it's done in a way that sees like nature as pure or idyllic or to be preserved, that actually puts like humans in a weird position of power where we're actually really not. We are at the mercy of the natural world far more than the natural world's at the mercy of us. And I know like that's a controversial thing to say because yes, we have had an immense impact on climate and like climate change really is on humans right now. But at the same time, we're also at the mercy of the natural world, right? And when we come back down from a more institutional level to a personal level, it's also like it creates a psychic disconnect between the life that we live and what we see as outside of it. So that's another reason to kind of think about queer ecology as as a way to find a new connection with the natural world, which is not defined by kind of hegemonic ideals of like what is nature.
Right.
Absolutely. And I think, interestingly, when we spoke the other day and, you were mentioning things and we were just, we had a discussion before this, we don't even think about it. I think to really change that framework and put in something completely new in there, that's super, powerful. I mean, it almost creates this whole new canvas to look at life in itself.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that is, and more than it being, I think it's almost freeing.
Right.
And it's almost like it's wonderfully experimental as well. So you have that kind of even as say cultivators or even as people working with fungi, to really like break some of these ideas and kind of put in a new perspective. It's wonderful. And everyone out there, this is not just for fungi. And while we are talking about the mycoverse, Malika's got some amazing things to share, and that will come to by the end of this live. But the idea is that there are so many ways to relook at ecology and the natural world, and I think it gives us such a wonderful opportunity to learn. So, from there, I mean, while we're talking about ecology, and you discussed about how we need to it even goes into biopolitics. And so where does in all of this, how does mushrooms play a role, and how are we looking at mushrooms in this life?
Yeah, why the mycoverse, right? Why we are mycoverse and not ecology in general? That's a great question. And I think mushrooms are just like fungi is such an ideal window into this world, which is so much broader than we're used to seeing it, because they are, by their definition, the other, the outside. They're not plants, they're not animals, they're not bacteria. And for most of the history of natural sciences, most of the history of botany, botanists have been confused by mushrooms. Like when Linnaeus was first naming all the plants and stuff, he called mushrooms lower plants because he didn't know where else to put them. And this is something that happens a lot in botany where things get recategorized and all, but in mycology, so much. Like every other day, some mushroom is being put in a different genus or something because there's a characteristic of undefinability in fungi that's really interesting. And the other reason I feel like it's such a great place to start when we think about what am I not seeing in the natural world is because mushrooms are really all around us, all around us. And we never notice them until we learn to notice them, right? So this is something that I've seen so much in my forays, and I know you guys have too. you get people who come and they're like so shocked that you see fungi here in the city, even here. Does this exist even here? And that is
Correct.
something like I can't, as a queer person, I can't help but see how similar that is to how people see queer people. Oh, queer people exist even here, even in our country, even in our city, in our neighborhood, in our society, you know. So that thing of being surprised by how
Very
this culture is all around us is so, it's so similar to queerness. And at the same time, like, I think if there are queer people in this live, and I know that they are, I think that you'll really find that when you think back to your own queer journey and when you first figure out this thing about yourself, you can really relate it to how it feels to learn about mushrooms, because suddenly you realize, like, I'm surrounded by this. Even though I didn't know, I was surrounded by this. This has been all around me. This is something I've been immersed in. This is something that I have had such a connection to. And another way that these two concepts connect is is this like thing that I like to call the revulsion to joy pipeline, which is when we grow up. I'm just talking about botany right now. I mean plants, or like the natural world. When we grow up, especially in cities, there are things that we consider good plants, like in our house, in the garden, etc. And then
So
there's right, and then there's like wilderness, there's things with bugs
correct.
in it, there's like, you know, dog poop, there's things you don't see. Mushrooms specifically are those things which are like, they freak us out almost, especially as
Right.
children, on a very gut level. And even as adults, there's a lot of weird looking mushrooms that inspire that feeling of revulsion in you, which a lot of things in nature do.
Right.
And revulsion is not an unnatural feeling, right? Like all of our emotions are natural emotions. And so going from revulsion, that's something that people with, like, when you have internalized homophobia as well, you feel a sense of revulsion towards queer things. And so
correct.
slowly, when you learn more about queerness, when you learn more about mushrooms, that revulsion turns to curiosity, turns to fascination, turns to joy, turns to enthusiasm, turns to love. And I think that is something that is so similar between these two. And I think, you know, safety is also something that fits in there. Prithvi, you were telling me the other day about your foray for children. Do you want to just share that anecdote?
Right. I mean, it was interesting. So the other day we were on a foray, and we had gone out with. There were also parents along
And
with children
teachers.
and
And
teachers.
teachers.
And interestingly, so children are coming with a new slate. There's a new sense of curiosity. There are not many biases already. I
Right.
mean, I'm talking about young kids, and they saw a mushroom, and they were excited by it, and there was a sense of, and immediately there was a parent who's come with this sense of, like you were saying, there's this
Fear.
this revulsion or this fear or whatever they've been fed through time and again and like conditioning, and immediately told them that you should not touch the
Yeah, don't
mushroom.
touch the mushrooms.
They're dangerous, and like you get some itch or some scratch, or they're
Allergies.
poisonous, and you giving just these blanket statements about some innocent mushroom that is actually not. And that's the crazy thing, and this is exactly what you're talking about. Even when it comes to the queer community, it's you don't know, people are just unaware, and this sense of like immediate sense of no or like
Yeah,
revulsion. And
yeah,
and I love that you mentioned that how it transforms into curiosity, and then it transforms into a sense of like acceptance,
Love.
and then it's love. I mean, at the end of it, it really becomes something that is so beautifully integrated once you really put in that kind of openness
Yeah.
and openness to it. And I totally agree. And that's such a similar way in which we've conditioned ourselves towards the mycosphere. And just wanted to add here that like when we started Nuvezo, right, it was crazy that one of the key aspects was this mycophobia that penetrates through the country, just like homophobia, or just
Right.
like it's like a phobia, and you're like no, and everything is like
And sense of so much authority that people come with, right? Like
Yeah.
there's so much authority.
Yeah. Like you're saying, this person was like, "Oh, don't touch it; you'll get an itch." That's such a specific thing. When we know that all mushrooms are safe to touch, there's no
Right.
mushroom that causes any kind of like skin reaction. But people come with this sense of authority, right? And I think the fact that this happens more with children and parents is so interesting because where do we learn our prejudices? We learn it from our parents, from our society. It's handed down, right? And it's so similar, like how it comes from a place of fear, and that fear is not inherent. Children want to know about mushrooms. It's exciting.
Right.
It's like, especially when you see mushrooms in fairy tales, are always like mystical and interesting, and there's like a caterpillar sitting on top of it that's gonna like show you the world and all of that. And then when you see mushrooms in adult literature, it's like it represents death and decay and degeneracy and untouched lands, all these kind of things. So it does show like how kids have that curiosity, and they have that curiosity about queerness. Let me tell you that. Like I encounter this so much in my life. I know queer people in this life will absolutely relate to this. Like children will just come up to you and say like, "Are you a boy or a girl? Aap ladka ho ya ladki?"
Right.
And
Yeah.
parents are like so freaked out by that question. It's like, why is that a bad question? Like the kid wants to know, right? If the kid's been told there's only two genders, they're having a hard time putting you in either box. They want to know. And I always say like both, either. It's all good. Like you decide for yourself how you see gender. Don't let me tell you. Don't let your parents tell you. And that's something that's really emblematic to me of like how society drills these phobias into our heads.
It's crazy. It's crazy, and I think that's why it's like I said, it's even so liberating to have this conversation and like integrate it and tell so many people about these kind of changes that we can see and derive them right from, I don't know, your backyard or
Yeah,
wherever
Yeah.
you're.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So, when we think of all of this, like degenerate, decay, and all of that, what are the other categories that come to mind, apart from this? Like, what
Right.
else?
So that's the other thing. Mushrooms being decomposers, they are kind of they take care of the dirty work of the natural world, right?
Right.
And so there's a lot more connections to make there as well. When we think of degeneracy, when we think of danger and all these thoughts, like these are terms that are absolutely applied to queer people as well. Sorry,
Right.
I just want to address this comment. This is why queerness is infantilized. That's such a great point because queerness is seen as like, even to really simplify it, if a child comes out to their parents as bisexual and they say, "Oh, it's just a phase, you'll grow out of it," it's
Right.
infantilized because it doesn't fit the overall structure of society, right? So that is
Right.
absolutely, I mean, that's such a great comment.
Right.
Back to what I was saying about danger and degeneracy, and like these are things that are applied to the queer community. When we think about decay, when we think about the fact that mushrooms are decomposers, they take care of the dirty work of the natural world, there's an intersection there with caste, which
Right.
I honestly am not in a position to speak about as someone who's not from an oppressed caste. That's not my place. But that's something I want to bring up, that even there's certain things about in our culture, for example, there is a lot of Brahmins who won't eat mushrooms because they're
Right.
considered non-veg, right? And is it that,
Right.
oh, it's non-veg because it's not a vegetable, it's not an animal, we know that? Or is
Right.
it that they are the ones who take care of the dirty work in the natural world? Are they compared to, or are they in that mental map? Is there a connection there with oppressed castes? So that's a question that I'm really keen to explore. Again, I'm coming from a privileged background, so I don't have the tools to talk about that. But that's another
Right.
way that we can think about how do we change our perspective on these things.
Right. And interestingly, I think in almost all the flea markets and events that we have done, a very common question that we get is, don't mushrooms grow in filth? Like mushrooms are so filthy, they grow in dirt and like unclean environments. And there are even myths in India, like I think mushrooms are called kukur mutta, which literally means like dog
Dog's
piss. Like,
umbrella.
dog piss. So people, there's this myth that mushrooms grow where dogs pee, and it's a very widespread myth. And I think all of this just adds up and points in the right direction of, how we stray away, or like we are so scared of this, what we call unclean or dirty, or like,
Again, she's saying like it's tying back into the whole caste
Correct.
and all of that, yeah? So
because you don't want to do something dirty, you have to prefer someone else did it for you. That's how it all comes.
started.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the concept of dirtiness, that's something to really explore, especially in our culture, but in generally in culture. Dirtiness is such a fascinating concept. I won't go into it too much here. I know we're going to do more talking about this later in other events and so on.
Yeah.
But to interface with, to engage with dirtiness is also a queer project. And that's something to think about, like the reclamation of dirtiness and what is considered dirty and how do we reclaim that. That's another thought to just follow down that train.
Park that there, folks, because we've actually, we've got something exciting coming up, and we're going to talk about that really soon at the end of this live. But so the idea I want to also talk about is, what about, in our day-to-day lives, when we look at ideas of gender or sex, or how does that translate in the mushroom world or like in the myco world? How does that really work? Maybe, talking about certain species that are, really don't have any,
or have many.
So,
Yeah.
right. So, Josh, you want to just talk about, yeah.
Good. So I think the textbook example here would be Schizophyllum commune with over 20,000. I think 20,000 compatible mates. Right?
Yeah.
There's no
Makes
mate,
sense,
it's just compatibility that it boils down to ultimately. And I think this is a great example to show that it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 20,000.
Yeah.
Right?
So the thing about gender is, I mean, to really get very basic, it's something we've invented. It's not something that really exists in the natural world. If we think about gender in terms of reproductive behavior, most of the natural world, in terms of numbers, species produce asexually, right? A lot of species produce homosexually. A lot of species are what in botany is called hermaphroditic, i.e. having both types of reproductive organs. Heterosexuality, and therefore two genders, is a very late addition to the natural, to evolution. And when we see gender in the natural world, we're seeing it because we're putting it there. So, like the example you gave of Schizophyllum commune, 23,000, more than 23,000 distinct mating types. So these two different types can all mate with each other. Those are genders if we are thinking about gender as reproductive behavior, which I don't personally, but if we are, those are genders. Even if we think of outside of mushrooms, just quickly, if we think of bees, we think there are girl bees and there's boy bees, and the queen bees are girls, and the worker bees and the drone bees are boys. But they all have distinct reproductive behaviors. So technically that's 3 genders then, right? So not to say that this is a hard and fast, I'm saying no, bees definitely have 3 genders, or these things are definitely, mating types are definitely genders. It's just like, let's understand the absurdity of even putting these labels on the natural world,
I think it sort of boils down to a reductionist mindset and like this obsession with categorizing and putting things into boxes. I think that's basically what has got us here, by looking at things in isolation and not understanding systems thinking, or systems design, and that's a lot of the reasons that we are here today. Even looking at monoculture, completely ignoring the role that fungi play in agriculture in mycorrhizal relationships, developing GMO plants which are just there to give you yield without even understanding what that network is. Looking at soil as something that's passive, as something that doesn't have life, it's just a medium. So all of these things.
Monoculture is such a good point. Like our culture is obsessed with just isolating rather than complexifying.
Right.
Yeah.
And another really interesting point is like, with AI coming in, all the jobs and things that are being like taken over by algorithms or all the things are just super specialized in one track. Whereas we are all good at doing multiple things.
Yeah.
And that's we have to start thinking of intersections of spaces and different things and trying to look at things, how they work together and other than in isolation, because That's not how the real world or like the world actually works.
Yeah, and I don't think it's human versus nature. Or
we are nature. Nature doesn't need to be saved by us. We need to save ourselves. We are part of the environment.
Absolutely. And this is something that comes up even in cultivation when we're growing mushrooms. We've spoken before about all these different ways of sterilizing substrate, right? When we kill off all the other organisms in a particular, in straw or whatever we're using to grow, to ensure that the mushroom mycelium we put in there has a blank slate, right?
Right.
It works. That's the way it's been developed for so long. That is important. But we often find that those kind of grows are sometimes even more prone to contamination than when you grow, like, you take that contaminated thing and you put it just in your backyard in soil, and suddenly it takes off because suddenly all these other organisms are taking care of the contamination. When you have a blank slate, that's blank slate for things to go wrong, right? And at the same time, when you have an ecology working together, that's something that allows life to thrive.
Correct. Seriously, like so much personal experience with really contaminated bags which I've completely given up on, shifted it outdoors, put it inside my garden, and like within a couple of days or a week, we just let nature do its thing, and we had like multiple flushes after that. What really happened there, I don't know. But we just let nature take over and do its thing.
So true. Absolutely. And I think that's anything, that naturally also kind of now fits into something that we've also seen in evolution as well. If you think of, plant versus animal, fungi, I mean, if we're looking at them even from, say, slime molds or algae, I mean, if it's just, it goes on. I mean, if you keep going down even down, what is this up and down again? That's something that which again I have an issue with, because with every single cultivation, workshop we do, we say, why do we believe we're on top of this? Fungi have been around way before us, and then we are coming here and saying, we know them.
So we start our workshop by saying that, listen, we are not the first people to grow mushrooms.
Yeah.
Nature, like tomatomyces, all of these other life forms have been doing this for forever. And we have this idea that, we're the first organisms to farm fungi, and we feel like we're on the top and we're farming them. We're not farming anything, we're just working with them. Right. And that's why all our cultivation workshops are like called the art of working with fungi, because more than a science, it's an art, and it's working with them and not growing or cultivating anything.
And that's why it fits so sweetly into this whole queer space, because we are, again, you said it's all around. Everything has been there. It's been there for a long time. It's just that because we don't see them, or we think that this is how we created the world, it's supposed to be that way.
The anthropocentric view of the world.
And I think that's just really lovely. I think the whole is really fit in. And I think, just wanted to know, is this also kind of, maybe you can shed some light on how this, while we look at science, there is also that element of like intangible, or say spirituality, or like things that we can't really, pinpoint and say,
put in a box.
Put in a box.
Yeah. And I think, again, mushrooms, like fungi, really allows us to think about what science and its mission is. I mean, we're all big fans of science here. I'm sure we love it. That's what, it makes the world happen. Absolutely true. But like everything else in the world, it's not free of biases, right? And biases like gender, sexuality, class, caste, race, etc. are there. But now the bias is also cultural, in the sense that most of the history of science has been created by Western hegemonic structures, like the Royal English Society of Science and all of that. And they're not necessarily taking indigenous cultures into account, right? And mushrooms, fungi is something that has been recognized by and used by and even worshipped by so many indigenous people all around the world. And even like especially hallucinogenic psychoactive mushrooms have been used as a part of religion and spirituality the world over. And when we it's very easy to say that, okay, there's the science part of mycology and then there's the like psychoactive part of mycology. But again, let's think about, is that really a binary, or do those two come together in some way? Because, I mean, now people, Western medicine is finally taking psilocybin assisted therapy seriously. There's clinical trials in Johns Hopkins and a lot of places around the world where they are testing, psilocybin therapy with a psychologist assisting. And that is bringing a very ancient culture of spirituality into modern science. The reason that it's not been done so far is because it doesn't align with the goals of the pharmaceutical industries, right? If you have to take one therapy once every 6 months and experience relief from that versus you have to take a couple of pills every day. Nothing against modern pharmaceuticals, very helpful, very useful. But at the same time, what else is there that we're not exploring? What else is there that is outside of the capitalist structures, which again fit into that overall patriarchal heterosexist hegemony that we live in? What else exists out there that could be helpful to us? And fungi gives a window into that. And just to I think just from personal experience, I grew up in a household that was extremely militantly atheist. Religion was absolutely we were always taught religion is not a good thing. There is no God. Believe in science, believe in reason and rationality and all of that. So that's how I grew up. I'm still not religious, but fungi has really allowed me to see how patterns exist in nature and how things come together and work together in a way that is extremely spiritual. And I think that, of course, nature as a whole, but fungi specifically, allows us to see that there's more out there that we're not noticing.
Correct.
It's lovely. I mean, you couldn't have captured that better. I think, I mean, it's really, really kind of it kind of brings that whole picture into a very, a beautiful kind of way, because I also relate to that a lot, because I mean, for me, I guess it was a mix. It was militantly atheist, like you're saying, and theist. So I guess there was that confusion in the middle. And you're right, fungi really tells you that you don't know everything, but you can see things, but you may not know everything. So I really loved how you really worded that, because, and I think this comes to the point that we know things. There is science, there is a lot of it, but can we drive this, can we drive this space more from a community perspective? And can we create a kind of can we create different avenues for people to figure this out and build a narrative that is driven by community? And I think that's why it is also so wonderful, and that's why we're able to do this. You're able to do so many things.
So I think this is the new paradigm.
This is the new paradigm.
Yeah,
Science is
absolutely.
operating paradigms. So this
Absolutely.
is the
And mycology.
Right.
Yeah,
Mycology.
and mycology has always been a discipline that has risen from the bottom up, from the grassroots. Even if we think about, where have y'all learned cultivation from? Where have I learned cultivation from? Paul Stamets, right? Shroomery, right? All these people who don't have formal education in this. And I've figured it out through trial and error, through that personal drive to understand these organisms better. And I get this question a lot, by the way. I'm sure you guys do too. I work in my day job, I work with teenagers. So when I talk to teenagers about mushrooms and they want to learn more, then they're curious, where can we study this, right? And in our country, but even abroad, our country especially, even abroad, mycology courses don't really exist in universities. If they do, they're under the Department of Plant Pathology, which again, pathologizing is really the central point of this conversation today. They exist in just this is a bad thing and we have to learn how to get rid of it kind of way, right? And of course, now it's changing. Now more colleges are teaching more about mycorrhizal relationships and so on and so forth. But most of the knowledge that is being shared is community-based. I mean, I see so many people in this live that are people that, have formed this kind of vague, loose community around mycology in India through trial and error, people that I have taken advice from, that we've discussed, our different experiments with, and so on. And that's something that really is again a hallmark of mycology, and it's a hallmark of queer culture. Now queer culture is, especially right now, like in the first few days of Pride Month, every corporation has a rainbow logo. There's everything, like there's Pride nights at every restaurant where you're basically being overcharged as hell for one drink and so on. It's become so common. But when we think about genuinely, like, the propagation of queer culture for the longest time was only person to person. It was only through these little underground communities. Where did you learn how to talk about gender and sexuality, how to understand yourself, how to, even things for trans people, how to put on makeup, how to bind your chest, how to tuck, how to do these things to perform gender in a way that you were never taught. That is something that was taught within the community. Of course, now you can find these things on YouTube and so on, same way we can find mycology stuff on YouTube. But the generational knowledge propagation is at the center of both these communities.
Totally agree.
Totally agree. And I think, that really shows. I mean, I guess when you see something evolve that way, you understand how community driven it is. And I think that's.
Yeah, a lot of the innovations in mycology came from like people like you and me. Like, for example, who made self-healing injection pods, right? There's some amateur mycologist sitting somewhere in his house trying to grow magic mushrooms. That's where self-healing injection pods came from.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, folks, I mean, I just want to say that, before we, I think we conclude because it's almost time. I want to say that this is just a snippet of what, Mycodyke has to offer. I mean, and the amount of work and research that she's done and kind of experiences that she's had before, I think it is just a slice. We've got an amazing workshop coming ahead, and we'll be stay tuned on our page and hers and theirs, and we'll be having a bunch of different activities for y'all to be a part of and explore in your own way. Maybe that's something you want to see and explore. But just before we conclude, I just want to say, what was your first experience, and with queerness, and how did this come about for you? Just so that people out there can kind of, share with, and maybe you can, if you don't mind.
Right, that's a good question. I think kind of that ties back into what we were talking about, things being all around us and not being noticed. Honestly, when we discussed this before, this is not what came to my mind, but what's coming to my mind now that we've had this conversation, is that queerness is always around you till you notice it, and not always in a great way, right? For most queer people, first experience of queerness is being called a slur, or being, somebody bullying you for it, or somebody, some violence that's related to it as a child. And that is, again, it relates back to how these things exist. People know it exists, but they're not willing to see it, right? And so when we think about, again, that revulsion to joy pipeline, often for queer people, the first experience of queerness is being called, for me, honestly, 6th grade, there was a girl, I'm not going to say her name on this slide, just all the time, Mycodyke is a lesbian. For me, that was like, of course not. How could that be? No, this is just an insult. There's no understanding that this might be true. It's just an insult, right? For most people in our generation, gay as an insult was the standard when we were in school, right? And that's what culture does. But then when you first experience queerness in a positive way, that's like, oh wait, there's this whole world. And my first experience of queerness that way was seeing, there was a teacher of mine in school who was very openly and steadfastly queer without saying it. Because you can't say it in her generation, her age, you can't say I'm queer, but you can say, don't call me Mrs., I'm Miss. You can cut your hair a certain way. You can talk about gender in your history class. You can do all these things that let queer kids know that this is an option for them. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Right.
Right. So true.
Last question for the.
No, I think. Can you hear us? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Fine. Yeah. Okay. I thought maybe you got stuck. So yeah, and I
I have
think
a question for you guys before we close. I have one quick question for you guys. Do you remember the first time you like thought about mushrooms as a concept?
you wanna go first?
So I can't remember the first time I thought about mushrooms as a concept, but I would say I'm from Kerala and my grandfather was a paddy farmer, my dad's dad. So I sort of grew up in nature and mushrooms were everywhere, right?
Mhm.
In my native place, I used to find mushrooms everywhere. So I sort of grew up with them around me, and I don't think I gave it so much thought, but I think that one moment that I can really think back on, I think Prithvi would share the same with me,
We went.
is when we were in Misha Pulimala in Idiki, and we were just passing through like a pine forest and we saw hundreds of Amanita muscaria, hundreds of them, and quite like shocked and big ones too. And we just stopped there and just sat down and just started looking at them, and there's something about them that drew us to them. And I think that experience was just like very magical, I would say. It was a really wonderful experience where I actually sat.
Such a great example of like when that switch flips and you're like, oh, this thing that I've been seeing all the time, oh, it's actually something that I love, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah, and I think, I mean, I just share, I mean, mom, again, that experience for sure, but like he said, I think I didn't really see it, like, I mean, it was around and things like that, but I think I used to trek a lot, and I still do, but seeing these colors amidst all the greenery suddenly, I have some distinct memories at treks that I've been on, and that's when you're like, oh, something very unusual about it, and then you're like, oh, it's a mushroom. But again, it was a mushroom then. It wasn't, and I'm talking about maybe 10 years ago, but it was just a mushroom, I guess, but not like mycology or something per se, but seeing that sudden sense of what do you say, color, or like a spot of beauty amongst all the green around, or I mean, it just
Yeah.
kind of gives you a sense of, oh, maybe I should pause and take a
Right.
look.
What a
So
great note to end on. What you said about seeing something unusual. I think that's what we're here to embrace as queer people is the unusual, the oddness, the weirdness, the queerness, right? And that's why, I mean, what a great note to end on.
So, hey, before we end, there's always this last question that we ask everybody who comes on this live,
Okay.
which is, what's your favorite mushroom?
yeah,
It has to be schizophyllum. It has to be schizophyllum for two reasons. One, queering mushrooms. I mean, they're all queer, only one, because, it just shows how much. I don't want to use the word diversity because that's a bit of but like how much multiplicity there is in our world, and it's everywhere. It's the one mushroom in the most like horrid heat wave of Delhi summers. You still see schizophyllum. There's still any little place it can find to pop up, it does, and that's why it's my favorite.
And so beautiful, like the gills are, I think, one of my favorite gills to like take photographs of because it's
Yes,
so
it is fabulous, which makes it a little gay.
awesome. We just have some lovely comments. Lighter Machis has been saying, Priyadal save lives, just being ourselves freely. We can't agree more. Drinks for sure. And yes, we will save the life. And sudden urge to draw mushroom from life for sure. I think all of you have amazing. You've been sharing so many comments and not no questions, but if you do have questions and you want to explore this further, please come for the workshop. Malvika is going to be the facilitator and going to take you through a really immersive journey. Stay tuned. We're going to have this up very shortly. And thank you all for coming by. And we really appreciate all of you being here and taking forward this movement. Both of us coming together and doing this in full stride.
right. Really
Thank you.
enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we'll connect soon. You'll be seeing more. Support us and thank you guys.
So for all of you, just quick note, for all of you who are tuning in from Bangalore, we have free foray happening on Sunday. where we're going to go to Lal Bagh and meet at 10 a.m. and just walk around, pick up some trash and look at some mushrooms while we do it as part of World Environment Day. So if you want to join us, come hang out with us in Lal Bagh at 10 a.m. Okay?
Yes.
I wish I could come.
Yeah.
Soon.
Yes, yes.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.